Hello friends! Welcome to my March reading wrap-up where I go through every single book that I read, the ratings for each book, and then a little bit about each one of them. Let's dive right in! This month was the month of the Kindle. The way I only read on my Kindle, it was crazy. I actually only read one physical book. Don't worry, I love a physical book. But my Kindle reigned supreme the entire month long. I'll start with some quick stats about my reading. I read 14 books this month. My average rating for each book was a little bit over 4 stars, which is really great, actually pretty high. As far as like spice rating, it was about a 2.35, which is like not bad at all. That's like pretty average for me if I'm being honest. And I read a little bit over 5,000 pages this month, which is honestly really impressive. I think anytime I get to like that 5,000 page mark, I am incredibly like impressed with myself, because normally it goes from like a 3,000 to a 4,000. So 5,000 definitely like that was up here. Okay, we were up here. I read from all kinds of genres this month, which was pretty exciting. The genre I read the most of this month was sports romance, followed by dark romance, and then we had a couple of contemporary romances in there. I did a fantasy romance. We had like a sci-fi monster-ish romance. So we had a good variety going for the types of romance books that I was reading. Most of the books that I read this month actually came from my library, so go off. I'm so proud of myself. I've been trying to really use my library more because last year I really like used Kindle Unlimited more, so I'm trying to like divide up how and like where I get my books from. So yeah, I'm really proud for using my library a lot. I also got a lot of ARCs this month, so publishers, authors sent me advanced copies for free, and so I read those. I don't really consider them like owned books because I don't really own them. It's more of like a borrowed copy. So I did read a lot of ARCs this month, which is great. Kindle Unlimited was definitely used this month. I love that subscription and I use it a ton. Like I said before, most of the books I read were ebooks with 71%, a little bit over that, which is again a lot. I did read some audiobooks this month. I was on a road trip in like the beginning of the month, so I definitely listened to a lot of audiobooks, got really into them, and just kept going. So I think I'm re-entering my audiobook era, which is really exciting because 2 years ago I was also really into audiobooks, but didn't read any last year. So I'm really glad that I'm like finding them again and finding ways to like sprinkle in a little extra reading throughout the year. And like I said before, I only read one physical book, and it was this one. Now let's dive into the books that I read. The first book that I read this month was On the Line by Naomi Loud. I got a advanced reader copy from Good Girls PR. This was my first book from Naomi Loud, and I was really excited to read from them. This is a line cook romance where we have like the love interest is a line cook at this like fancy restaurant, and the main character is like an ex-rich girl who goes from like riches to rags when she basically like disowns herself from her family to go live on her own. She has to get a job, and she gets a job as a server at this restaurant that this line cook works at, and they have this like instant chemistry that occurs, and then they kind of just like can't stay away from each other. And our main character has a really shitty boyfriend who like kind of causes a lot of issues for the main couple, and they obviously end up breaking up, and there's all that drama. This may have been my first Naomi Loud book, but it was certainly not going to be my last. I'm actually going to go through their backlist because I'm really eager to read some of their other books. This was kind of the perfect book. Like, I loved this book so much. It's actually my favorite book that I read for the entire month, which says a lot because I loved so many of the books that I read, but this one definitely stood out to me the most. The next book that I read, I borrowed from my library, which was Lore of the Wilds. I was really eager to read this. I had put my hold for the library like way before the book even came out, and then it finally became available, so I read it. I did give it 3 stars only because, and I'm having a hard time even reviewing this book because it's a duology, and so the second book isn't even out yet. It's not even announced, so I have no idea what the title is. I don't know when it's coming out. I don't know anything about book 2. All I know is that this first book was okay, but it was mostly because of the ending that really frustrated me, and I don't want to spoil it because I definitely want to like gather my full thoughts once the entire series is out. Overall, I thought that this was fun. The ending was very startling, and honestly, the type of cliffhanger that kind of makes you a little sick to your stomach, that makes you want to read the book like the next one immediately. And the fact that I couldn't do that was really sad. But this is about like a magical library, and this is like a fantasy world. There is a love triangle involved. Lore is our main character who lives in this like human town, and they're kind of isolated. Like, they're not allowed, like the humans are not allowed to leave the human town because all around them are like fae, and the fae are basically keeping them trapped in this like village. One day fae actually go into the human village, and they say, hey, we need somebody to come with us back to this like fae castle or whatever, and they choose Lore, or Lore chooses herself. It's like a really weird way on how they decide who gets to go with them. So she travels through with these fae, and she's all by herself with these people who she does not know and does not trust. She gets led to the castle and is basically told, hey, there's this magical library that is enchanted, so like none of the Fae are allowed to go inside because it's enchanted, so like it'll hurt them or whatever if they try to go, but humans can go inside. And so they basically hire Lore to go inside this library and try to find certain texts that are been trapped in this library for thousands of years. And that's kind of what the story is really about. The magical library part is really fun. This was described as like a cottagecore romance, fantasy romance, and I definitely agree with that. It has that cottagecore vibe. There was definitely moments that were like a little bit more cozy and not super high stakes, but there are high stakes and like a lot of fights and stuff that happen and a lot of like suspense that occurs, especially towards the end of the book. It is not over. It did end in a cliffhanger, so I will definitely have to keep you guys updated with how I feel about book 2 once that gets announced. I then read the Hit Me With Your Best Shot sports romance anthology. This is an anthology compiling up of 6 short stories from 6 different authors, and 2 of the authors that are featured in this anthology I'm already fans of, so that was Saffron A. Kent and Kai Stevens, and I was really excited to read their stories. My plan going into the anthology was to just read those 2 stories and then get out of there, but then I decided just to keep reading because each one was pretty short. So I read from every single author, and I would say that there was like a 50% success rate with this anthology. I only really liked 3 of the stories, 2 of them being from authors I already read from, and then 1 from an author that I had never read from, but I really do want to read more of her books, which was S.J. Slavis. I think I'm saying her name correctly. But yeah, those were the 3 authors I enjoyed reading from in this anthology. The other 3 were okay. I definitely was just not vibing with them as much. It was still really fun. I rated it 4 stars. I don't know if I'll ever do another anthology, but I did get the advanced copy to this because I'm on Kai Stevens' like ARC team. So last year for Sports Romance September, which is a reading event that I host on TikTok and Instagram, and then this year I'll be doing it on YouTube, I wanted to read The Savage by Daniela Romero. However, I found out that this book was going to end in a cliffhanger, and book 2 hadn't even been announced, or was announced but had like postponements and stuff, and so I wasn't sure when the book was going to come out, and I was really scared, nervous to read it because I didn't want to have to like wait for a sequel. So then when I found out that The Striker was coming out and there was ARC signups, I immediately signed up and got the ARC. So once I received the ARC for book 2, I went back and read book 1, The Savage. So I read The Savage and The Striker by Daniela Romero, and spoiler alert, they both end in cliffhangers. So even though I waited to read The Savage so that I didn't have to wait for another book, I read The Striker and still have to wait for book 3 for this entire couple. And I just want to say before I start talking about this story, trigger warning for like sexual assault. This book is super heavy on the triggers because it surrounds this topic, because Cecilia is our main character who goes to a frat party and is like essayed by 3 of the frat brothers, and she is super traumatized with this entire event, and it's described in detail in the story, and it's her journey of becoming like a survivor, of being a survivor and surviving this super traumatic event. But where Gabriel, her love interest, comes in is when she attempts to like unalive herself, and he finds her and he gets her help, and that's kind of where their story starts. So he has essentially saved her life and got her help, even though Cecilia really didn't want his help in the first place. She was really ready to like end her entire life based on the events that had happened to her over the summer, and he got into the way of her plans. So like the semester starts and she sees him and she's really mad at him. She's like, oh my god, like this guy really ruined my plans. Gabriel essentially saves Cecilia's life even though she wasn't wanting to be saved. And so when they meet again on campus after the events of what happened after he finds her, he realizes that Cecilia is not in a good place and is not getting proper help, and he has this feeling in his gut that she is going to make another attempt. And because he lost his twin brother in the exact same way, he takes it upon himself to basically try to save her. And so he transfers into all of her classes and basically demands that she spend time with him and keeps her distracted so that she won't feel like this helplessness that she's been feeling. And that's his way of trying to help her. And as this is happening, Gabriel's friends become Cecilia's friends, and they kind of create this like found family that is very strong. And it was definitely one of the best parts of the story. But of course, Cecilia and Gabriel start to form this romance and they start to fall in love with each other. And this is kind of what the story is about. And I don't know how to talk about these 2 books without spoiling it. So that's basically the premise of the 2 stories, is about Cecilia and being a survivor, not just from sexual assault, but from like attempted suicide. And I think that that is a really like beautiful story. I'll be honest, there were parts of this book that really just made my heart crumble into dust. Like, I don't know how I got through these books. They were addicting, but also heartbreaking, but also full of love and a lot of like support in that found family aspect. Overall, I really loved these books, but definitely check content trigger warnings before you even decide to pick up this book. It was pretty hard for me to read, but I resonated with their story so much, and I fell in love with these characters, and I am so unbelievably excited for their third book. I really hope that it is their last one and it wraps up their story and that they can live happily ever after, because right now they're not, and it's driving me wild not knowing what's gonna happen. I kept going with the sports romance theme, obviously. I got to the arc to Catching Feelings by Maren Moore because I'm on her arc team, and this is book 2 in a sports romance baseball series, and I loved this book. The couple in this story, Viv and Reese, were like kind of teased at the end of the home run proposal, and of course I was really excited for their book because it's going to be like a hate to love, like forced proximity romance. They don't like each other, or so we think, and it kind of turns into this like roommates to like lovers, friends with benefits type of situation. I really liked it. It was very lighthearted, very fun, very sweet. I always have a really fun time with Maren Moore's books, so this was literally no exception. It was great. It was super fun, and I definitely recommend reading book 1, The Home Run Proposal, first before reading Catching Feelings, and there will be a third book that comes out later this year called The Walk-Off Wedding, which is about another one of the baseball players on the team. I had a fun time with this series, and I would definitely recommend it. I read another arc this month. I read the arc to The Homewrecker by Sarah Kate, which is book 2 in the Good Brothers series. This book follows a married couple who is going through like a little bit of a crisis, right? They kind of like are losing their spark in their marriage, and on top of all of that, they decide to bring in somebody to move into their home who like needs a place to stay after their house burns down, and that person happens to be Caleb Good's younger brother's ex-boyfriend. Let's just say he moves in. There's a ton of sexual tension between all 3 of them. So Caleb and Briar are married, and they are this married couple, and then they bring in Dean, who is the brother's ex-boyfriend, and all 3 of these people start to have a ton of chemistry. There's a lot of animosity between Dean and Caleb. They don't really get along, but Briar is here and she's falling for Dean, but she also loves her husband, but their husband's having a hard time like in their marriage, and they're just dealing with a whole bunch of stuff. Long story short, there is the cheating trope involved in this story. If you don't like cheating, probably don't read this book. I happen to actually really enjoy that trope because I love the drama of it, and so this entire dynamic was really fun to read about. This is actually my favorite Sarah Kate book, and I never thought I'd be able to pick a favorite, but this one was it. This had everything that I wanted in a book. It's super spicy. There's a ton of tension. There's so much love, and like each character really does get their own story. And the problem that I have with a lot of books that involve more than just one character is that sometimes it feels like one character gets more like page time than the other characters, but all 3 of these characters in this book really do get like their own stories told, and it feels very like fleshed out and full, and I loved it. It was so phenomenal, and honestly, I don't know if I will ever love a Sarah Kate book more than I love The Homewrecker, and I love how she's able to take tropes that people historically really don't enjoy, like cheating or marriage in crisis, and make them into something that is truly a almost life-changing experience. Like, he did something pretty creative with the tropes in a way that I haven't seen a lot of other authors do. Anyways, I definitely recommend this, the Good Brothers series. I love it. But yeah, The Homewrecker was definitely my favorite one. One of the audiobooks that I read that's kind of getting me back into my audiobook era was Hate by Tate James. This is a duet narration book that I borrowed from my library, and the duet narration is literally fantastic. This audiobook feels like a movie in your head. Like, it is so cinematic, and the narrators do such an amazing job bringing this story to life. This book is an enemies to lovers in the way that all enemies to lovers should be every single time, no doubt about it. We have our main character, who is Madison Kate, and she goes to this like Halloween fight club type night where there's like fighters, like MMA fighters, and there's a riot that breaks out during this like Halloween fight night thing. Her and her friend Bree try to run away, but then she gets tangled up with these 3 dudes who she does not know, and she thinks are gonna hurt her, but they end up like trying to help her get out of the situation, only for her to end up getting arrested at the end of the night and has all these charges pressed against her because they think that she was the person person who came up with the illegal fight night thing. And so basically she spends the next year away from her hometown, away from everybody that she knows, because obviously she was arrested, so her entire like reputation is tarnished, and she doesn't return back to Shadow Grove, which is the place that she's from. She doesn't return back until a year. And she finds out that her father had moved into a completely new home. Her father's not even there, and the 3 dudes that set her up on that night live there now. And they try to like tell her what to do. She's not having it. She pulls a bunch of pranks on them. This book is a why choose, so she's going to have a relationship with each one, and hate ends on a cliffhanger, and then the story picks up with Liar, and there's 4 books in the series. I have only read the first 2 books, Hate and Liar. I have not read Fake or Kate, which are the next 2 books in the series, but I've really been enjoying this on audio. I'm just waiting for my hold at the library for the last 2 books. This series is super fun so far. I'm really enjoying it. I'm having a great time. It's the kind of books that like really you cannot take too seriously, and they don't even take themselves that seriously. Like some of the things that happen in this book are so funny and so like ridiculous that you can't help but laugh, but it's still pretty dark considering that it's a dark romance. So it's like a fun dark romance, if that makes any sense, because the book really isn't that serious at all. It is probably one of the most unserious dark romances that I have ever read, and I'm enjoying it so far, and I can't wait to read the rest of it. For one of the last weeks of the entire month was the Trans Rights Readathon that I participated in. I participated last year and I had a really fun time, and so I participated again this year. And the books that I read for this readathon, the first one was Hide and Seek, which is kind of like a shorter book. It's about this dystopian world where you basically enter into these games. This is kind of like if the Hunger Games and Nerve had like a book baby, but people basically enter into these games as a like hider or a seeker, hence the name of the game being Hide and Seek. And essentially the hiders have to hide from the seekers who are trying to kill them, and whoever has the most points at the end of this entire night wins. And the way you get points is by like killing people or by staying hidden. And there's like rich people who like watch from like the outside because it's being broadcasted. That's kind of where like this dystopian world kind of comes in the way that like the Hunger Games, like how everyone's watching those games. But it's also like Nerve, where like people in the audience that are watching have like an input on like what happens during the games. It was pretty fun. It was really, really dark, and there are tons of morally gray characters. There was moments where I was like, like I can't believe they did that, and that was like totally like it was a scandal. I mean, seriously, most of this book was very scandalous. I had a really fun time with it. I definitely would suggest checking content warnings because there's a lot of violence in this book. I almost couldn't stomach it, but I pushed through. And this is a romance between 2 people who enter the games together in order to like win a bunch of money. I liked the premise and the idea of this story. Execution-wise was like a little okay. There was a lot of back and forth between like timelines, so we'd go back in time to like before the games are happening to like going through like when the games are happening. It was just a lot of back and forth that I didn't particularly enjoy, and a lot of the details about why the 2 people in the book are in the games in the first place are not found out until the end of the book because we keep going back and forth, and I didn't really love that. I wanted to like have the information up front as to why they're in these games in the first place. But other than that, I had fun with it, and I do think that there will be more books in the series. I haven't seen any announcements for it, but based on the way that it was written, it sounds like there's going to be other books about the different games that are in the like this dystopian world. Anyways, I would recommend it, but just check content warnings. I then read Heart Haunt Havoc by Freydis Moon, and I read this book because a lot of my friends had been like raving about this author and their books, and I was like, sure, I'll give it a shot. And I will say that I don't think this author is for me, and that's okay. I read one of their books last year and I thought it was okay. I didn't pick a book that was like their most popular one. I thought back then that that was the reason why I didn't enjoy it as much, because it's not what they were known for. I would say that this series by them is the most popular one, and I'm just not really a huge fan of like the horror aspects of the book, which is like the main part of the book. And so that is kind of my bad for picking a book that I kind of had a feeling I wasn't going to like. I'm okay with admitting that this book was just not for me. The last audiobook that I read this month was How to Bite Your Neighbor and Win a Wager. This is a romance between a vampire and a human. Vampire in the story like sneaks into people's houses, and he happens to sneak into our other main character's house to like get his blood, and he's trying to do this in a way that's like, it's definitely not consensual, but he's hoping that it doesn't hurt people, except the person that he bites finds out that he's being bitten by a vampire, but he needs a vampire for help figuring out like solving the mystery behind his mother's death. And so he enters into this agreement with the vampire saying, hey, you can bite me and have my blood if you help me with this thing. And they become friends slowly, and then obviously they start to fall in love with each other. This is like the most slow burn of all slow burns, I'm just letting you know right now. But it was really sweet, and I really liked the idea behind the book. It was very unique and different, and definitely not what I was expecting from like a vampire human romance. My only physical book that I read this month was The Prospects by Katie Hoffman. This book is about minor league baseball players who used to be on the same college team, and then Luis, one of the characters, gets drafted into the major leagues and goes off to play Major League Baseball. Gene, our other main character, stays in college, finishes out his college career, but then later goes to play for the minor leagues. 2 years go down and Luis actually gets traded to the major league team, but then gets sent down to the minor leagues. So now he's on the same team as Gene, and they're kind of both fighting for the same position, which is shortstop, which their coach ends up giving to Luis, who's new to the team, and sends Gene to second base. At first, they're rivals because they're going for the same position on the field. Then later, they kind of become friends when they start to train together, and then slowly but surely, they also kind of develop this romance. Not to mention that Luis has always had a crush on Gene and just has kept that a really big secret from him. And so their romance is very sweet, very tender. It was a little bit of a slow burn. I love the progression of their relationship, going from rivals to friends and then to falling in love. Like, that was just such a wonderful progression. I really like seeing the different stages of their relationship. This book is a sports romance, and there is a really big emphasis on the sport part of the romance. I would definitely say it's like 50-50. A lot of sports romance books don't tend to have so much of the sport aspect. It kind of just becomes like a background thing. But in The Prospects, it's absolutely a main part of the story. Not only is it a love story between two baseball players who are teammates, but it's also a lot about their careers and where they see their careers going as professional baseball players. Overall, it was a great time, and I definitely recommend it, especially if you love baseball. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of baseball, but I still really enjoyed the story and thought it was super cute. And then the last book I read this month, the one I snuck in on the very last day, My Dad's Best Friend by Katie Roberts. This wraps up my entire journey with the Touch of Taboo series. I've read every single book, which was 4 of them. This is my second favorite book in the series. It's about this girl who recently takes over her father's company, and she visits her dad's best friend, who used to be a partner for the company, to ask for like some advice. She goes there to ask for like a partnership, and he says no, but she ends up getting stranded at his house because there's a giant storm and she can't leave. And so they spend this very like steamy weekend together because she's trapped in his house, and there's this attraction between the two, and they just can't help themselves. It's a short novella. It was very fun, very spicy, very classic Katie Roberts. This entire series was a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed this book. It's just classic spicy novella type stuff, and a great way to like wrap up the month. Anyways, friends, this was my March reading wrap up. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and thank you so much for sticking around. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and follow me on Instagram for all updates outside of just the video stuff. Love you guys. I'll see you guys next time.